Your last questions first, or you?
Just just go ahead and say your name, when you were born, and your experience in the war. That'll
Okay,
be
my name is Vernon Truemper. I was born December 6, 1922, in St. Louis, Missouri. And my experiences in World War II, I wanted to understand that I'm just one person among about 2 million, some who made it and some who didn't. And I was one of the lucky ones that made it through.
So these are questions that I had for you, my dad had for you, and Grandpa Jerry had for you. This one was coming from Grandpa Jerry. At what age did you join the Army and the Army Corps?
Well, actually, when I was in St. Louis, Missouri, going to junior college here because I wanted to get an education because I always wanted to get into the Air Force and I had to have 2 years of college. And while I was on a streetcar on the way home back to my grandmother's where I was staying, why, word got to us that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. And so I immediately came home and went there, and I was about 18 years old at the time, and enlisted to become an aviation cadet because I've always wanted to fly. And I think as a kid, I read every kind of novel I could find about Dusty Ayres and his battle aces and G8 and his battle birds flying an airplane. And I always dreamt it, hoping and wishing that someday I could learn to fly. And so I was going to try to become a cadet, aviation cadet in the Air Force. And that's where I enlisted in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and I don't exactly remember the date now, but I was about 18 or 19 years old at the time.
Was there ever? Did you always know you wanted to fly and be a part of the Army, or did you have a specific moment that made you want to join?
No, I always knew because all the magazines that I read, I would put myself in the Dusty Ayres and G8 and his battle aces. I was part of him. And I flew the planes with him. No, I dreamt about that as a kid, always wanting to fly.
Where did you take your training at?
Oh, I had the training. It was San Antonio, Texas. It was pre-flight as an aviation cadet. Then we went to Stanford, Texas for primary, and we flew the single-engine Ranger, 195 horsepower, I think it was. Training plane, Stanford, Texas, and then Garden City, Kansas. We went to basic, and we upped the horsepower to about 450 horsepower on the engine. That was a bigger plane. And then finally, in advanced training in San Antonio, Texas, it was at 650 horsepower, I believe. And there's where we finally ended up in getting my first solo in a fighter plane without an instructor was the P-40, where you had to take it off and never have the flight instructor with you into a fighter plane. That was my first experience. And that was one that I'll never forget too, because once I got it off, I was consider myself lucky when I'm up in the air and felt like I owned the world. And I started having trouble with the what they call the propeller, Curtis electric propeller that synchronize the propeller with the throttle to maintain constant RPM and that. And so I was beginning to have trouble in that, and I was forced to begin to make a forced landing in one of the emergency fields that was around San Antonio at the time. So it's just a dirt field that was kept cleared where for emergency landings, and I came in. So my first landing in a fighter plane was an emergency landing made into a dirt field outside of where I was trained at. I was able to communicate with the tower to tell them that I was on the ground, and so they sent my instructor and a mechanic out to the airfield and came and fixed whatever the problem was with the Curtis Electric at the time. And so he told me to take it off from the emergency field, so I had to take it off myself. So my first landing and takeoff was from an emergency field, and I made it through that thing and landed there, and finally got in my sufficient enough hours in the P-40 at the advanced training with the advanced trainers. The advanced trainers were what they call AT-6s, and that was the dual where the instructor. But of course, the P-40 was a regular fighter plane, and you had to get 10 hours of that in, and I was able to get that in. And we went down then to Matagorda, somewhere on the Gulf, near Gulf of Mexico, to get some aerial gunnery, and still in advanced training. Got an aerial gunner then. And completed that on just before Pearl Harbor. Let's see, it was before my birthday, yeah, and happened to be a year right after Pearl Harbor. Completed that training, and got my wings. And remember, I had to when I come out, the first GI that saluted you, you had to give him a dollar bill, and. So there we received orders to proceed to Miami, Florida. We stayed there for 2 weeks and received shots, yellow fever, just about every tropical disease that you could think of. We had to stay there for 2 weeks to see if there was any reaction. And then we flew down to Panama. And from there, I was in the 32nd Fighter Squadron. We flew P-39s, which was a single engine, of course, inline Allison engine, liquid cooled, which I've got plenty of pictures of, I think, in there that show that. But we flew those. It was a nice airplane to fly. But every time anything that came into the canal, why we had to go out and intercept it. Bingo was the ground controller that would send us to that because so any airplane or any boat or ship that was coming into the canal zone, we had to go out and intercept it and check it out if it was okay. In order to enter the canal zone, you had to enter it just in a certain way, on the Atlantic side, right at the gates there, where the two dikes were, and where the boats came in. We had to pass over that to get to our airfield, and it was at what was called France Field near Colon, Panama, and it was a good airfield. And flying from that, and to come in if you were out and had to come into the canal zone from the Atlantic or Pacific side, you had to fly over at 800 or 500 feet altitude over a little island, small island, and coming, which was the entrance to the canal zone. If you didn't come in at that altitude, why, you would be shot at. And so anything that didn't come in that way was considered enemy. And so I was there in the canal zone for about 6 or 7 months. I can't recall how long. But I was in the canal zone there when one of the aircraft carriers came through, and had a chance to get over in my first experience in getting on an aircraft carrier and seeing how they landed and took off. And you felt like it was a piece of, like I say, a piece of ground of the United States Army, Air Force. A big thing, like a big field, the deck was. And we were looking at it and figuring, well, we could land, I could land a P-39 on that. Didn't think any more about it. But anyway, that was after we finally got orders to report to the United States to Suffolk Air Force Base in Long Island, New York. And going into Suffolk Air Force is where we were checked out on P-47s, 2,000 horsepower Pratt Whitney engine that was the latest fighter plane at that time. And it was weighed over 6 tons, I think it was, a big, heavy plane. But it went at cruising speed around 350 to 400 miles an hour. And it was heavy enough that if you were at 8,000 feet and what they called split S rolled over on your back and pulled forth and came straight down, you could exceed the speed of sound with it. And but anyway, I was at Suffolk Air Force Base there for, I can't recall how many weeks checking out in that airplane, but we got aerial gunnery with it and had to put enough time into it and had a chance to fly over New York, and I even flew over the Empire State Building, flew over New York itself and came down and flew around the Empire State Building and checked out everything, but nothing really exciting there. But I can always say I flew around the Empire State Building, which later on I'll be able to say that I flew around the Arch de Triomphe, Eiffel Tower, right around the tip of the Eiffel Tower. After when we at the end getting ready to go out leave for the South Pacific. That was later on when the war was ended. But anyway, we went over on the Queen Elizabeth. That was the latest cruise. It was a airline or ship, the big ship. And we didn't have to go over with a convoy or anything like that because it could change speed. It went at a speed fast enough. It could change it fast enough that any submarine could not line itself get a shot at you. And that's the reason we didn't need to go with a convoy. And so we went over as the Queen Elizabeth, just a single ship, and learned how to play bridge. A group of my buddies and that, we played bridge and spent a lot of time in that. But it rolled and rocked and rolled in the I forget what they call it, where there was a recreation room or something like that. But it rolled so much that all the tables and chairs would ride the one side of the ship to the other. On the side, they'd have to bring them back in the middle of the room. But and I recall that as I slept, the way it rolled, that I knew good and well they was just going to keep on rolling right on over, and I slept near what do they call those little circular windows and that near where I was sleeping, and then I could look out and I kept seeing whether we were going to make it or not, and I thought for sure that was going to happen. It was just going to roll over and upside down one of these times. But anyway, we made it all right. It took 5 days to get across and came into Southampton, England, North England. And we were transported into London there, near London. I can't recall the place there. But anyway, from there, we got our orders to report to our respective groups. And I was assigned the 367th Fighter Group. They were originally, before I got there, flying P-38s. But the P-38 was not a good ground support plane, and the P-47 was designed for ground support. And that's when we came in, when they went with the squadron changed over to P-47. So I came in there at that time. And so we got our missions. I came through, and I ended up with the 3267 fighter group, and ended up with 36 missions. And when the war ended in Europe, and we were on our way to Japan. But anyway, the 36 missions that I had, the 35 missions was the average life of the fighter pilot, and I exceeded it by one. But of course, we were going over to Okinawa to participate in the invasion of Japan, which was going to be a bloody one, no doubt. But fortunately, or unfortunately, the atomic bomb was dropped, and Japan surrendered. And so our ship that we were on going over, our supplies had already been shipped to Okinawa, where we were to be stationed at. They were already there, but we went over on John Erickson. It was just a regular ship. And as we pulled out of the Mediterranean Sea and crossed into the Atlantic Ocean, or Pacific Ocean, it received word to change its course to the States, to come back to the States, that the war in Japan had ended. And when on our way back, the captain called out then that he had received supplies for us, that a longer route to go to Okinawa, and he expected us to eat all that by the time we got into the States. So we ate real good going back to the States, and landed there in Southampton 5 days later. And that's the broad view of my military experience. A lot happened in between during that time that I was at all those places.
Tell them about the time you pulled into the Hammerhead stall.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, this was when I was down in Panama. We were flying P-40s before we got into. We were transitioning to the P-39s. I was in the P-40 then, I believe it was, and our instructor carried us up, and we'd always go. He'd give single file there, and he'd go through every kind of loops and rolls and everything, and all while he was gaining altitude, we did everything that he did, following experience. And while he was gaining altitude, we were always looking up. Nose of my plane was looking up, and I finally reached a point where we were around 20,000 feet. And then I pulled the nose of my plane back too far in order to see him, and it went into a stall because I lost the flying speed. When you stall, you have no control. And here I was pointing up like that, and my plane just tipped over and just came straight, that tail down. And while I was falling, the only thing that I remember were all the dust and debris and crud and everything else that was in the cabin. It was hit me in the face, and then I fell around 16,000 feet, and finally recovered at 4,000. The nose finally came down. I was able to recover and pull out at 4,000 feet. So if I was just 16,000 instead of 20,000, why, I wouldn't be here today. That was the Hammerhead stall that I could always tell everybody, well, I know I did a Hammerhead stall.
Well, do you remember saying anything or any very specific thoughts you had in that exact moment when that happened?
Well, I guess you become it's just like any emergency, I guess. The first thing you're concerned about is survival. You want to. So the only thing I could think of was, well, I better try to do something. Let's do something here. Try to push the stick forward to get the nose down. Cause wouldn't had no control, and I was pretty well helpless when it was falling tail first. It took a long time for that nose finally to come around and fall around and get down to the point where I could recover. And once that was falling down, and I knew that I was doing all right. I was beginning to a point when that nose started coming down, I could get speed and control of the plane if I made it before hitting the ground. And you don't think about in all the close calls, I guess you never think about what's going to happen to you or anything. I think it's just natural. You try to react to the emergency at any given time, and that. So.
What was it like after you had finished that route and you finally got to land and just getting out and like stepping back on land? Do you remember any feelings you had after that?
After that,
yeah.
No, I think it's pretty much ingrained into you that these things are going to happen. You're going to have experiences, and it's part of flying, and especially if flying a fighter plane, where a big plane, a heavy plane like that. Afterwards you get up and you begin to talk to the other fellows what happened and laughing about it and everything. Of course, you want to put on a show. You don't want to show that you were scared, and which damn good and well you were scared while you were falling, but you ain't going to let on that you do it.
What about another time that you were flying in formation and your lead was too slow and you had to drop out of formation and went into a cloud bank, and then you couldn't see anything? And
I was in the cloud bank. This was when we were on a mission. The squadron commander, he has a wing on his right side, and then there'd be an element leader on his left side, and the element leader would have a wingman, those 4 planes. That would be called a flight. There'd be flight, I was in D-flight, I think, a picture in there, if I remember, it said D-flight. But anyway, I was on 4 planes I was following my leader, and so he was flying. We were going into this flight bank, so the leader goes on his own instruments. You pull up, he pulls up, we fly wings so close together, we just he flies instruments really for the whole group. And so I was on his tail like here, but here's this guy, that wingman of the flight leader was right here, and my leader was right here pulling up, getting close enough to see him. And if I was close enough here to where I was supposed to be, he should have brought me over here somewhere, but he didn't. And he put me behind this other guy. And my propeller, I would say, was, I could see the tip of my propeller and the tip of the tail of the other thing. I would swear it wasn't more than 12 inches away. That, in other words, there would have been 2 planes, 2 deaths, and just if it had been just a little bit closer. And so, but anyway, I was so far in behind this guy, wingman I'd have to draw you a picture to get it. But my tail propeller was so close to him, and I was getting his prop wash, my wings lose aerodynamic lift. I have no control on my stick. It's just like a loose stick there, no matter what I did. And all I could do, I jam forward the stick as much as I could to get the nose down, and it was down, gradually came down, and I pulled away and began to get control, but I was in the cloud bank. And then, of course, I wasn't flying instruments. The flight leader, the squadron leader, was flying the instruments, and everybody was flying on his wing. And so I had to switch over to instruments and stabilize the plane and try to get it back into a position where it's flight straight and level, or could fly with a have. And finally, remembering the other thing that came to my mind there then was center of the needle, center of the ball, and check airspeed. There's a needle and ball that that you could have that wasn't on gyroscopes, artificial horizons. You didn't need that, so it was the only instrument you could rely on: center of the needle and center of the ball. And so I went to the mechanics. That's the first thing that came to my mind, and finally got out into a speed where I began to get some reasonable control. And next thing you know, I came out of the bottom of the airbank to the ground, and I was below the level of the trees as I pulled up. And as soon as I pulled up, I saw how close to the ground I was. I was in a valley that at the end of the valley, if I didn't pull up, I was going to go into a teeth. I had to set my gyroscope to anchor it and loosen it so that it's okay. And then I go onto my gyroscope, and I pulled up into the clouds and flew on instruments up to the top of the clouds, and finally broke through the overcast at about 8,000 feet then. And as I was climbing up, I looked down here. Pretty soon, looking down, I could see the squadron just coming up through the clouds. And so I was able to sail down and join them. They didn't say anything. Nobody said anything. It's routine type of thing. And so, yeah. But the thing that did happen, though, my flight leader I was flying his wing that moved me into that position, was a captain, and I was a second lieutenant. Let's see, I was second lieutenant. When we landed, got back from the mission, I got him and called him everything, any name under the sun. All he did was stand there and listen to me because he knew he was wrong. He had no business putting me in a position like that. What he should have done was told me to get over to, before we get into the cloud bank, and to the element leader's wingman, get on his wing, and so that all planes would be clear of each other as they went to the cloud bank. But he put me right behind the wingman of the squadron leader and got me in that position. And I guess I called him everything under the sun, and got away with it. He just stood there and listened to me. He could have got me for everything, I guess, because he had rank, but he didn't. He knew he was wrong. So. But that's about one of the closest things that I've come to that, what they call hanging your jock.
I have a slight memory from when I was a kid, you telling a story. Did your helmet ever fall off and hit you in the face?
Oh, that was when on a mission. We were I was coming down. This was I can't remember which mission it was, but everything was normal, and I lifted off, and then made to come around to join the flight leader to group up to go for the mission. I began to lose power, and I know with all the weight that I had, the belly tank and I can't remember whether the bombs we were carrying or what, but I had enough weight I couldn't keep it, and I didn't want to drop it right there. With friendly territory right off the airfield there. And I called in, said I was coming back around. I was going to, so we took off. And so I broke away and came in to land. And as I was coming into land there, I was coming at a normal speed there, the normal angle and the glide path and everything looking good. And as I start pulling back to gradually lose some altitude, and that Well, I gradually lost. As soon as I pulled back, my plane just dropped down. As soon as it hit the ground, it broke off the wheels and on the wing and that, and the helmet I was on flew back of my head and that, and so I slid in on the wing off of the runway, and other than I knew that I'd hit the ground hard. I told them, and the thing that I insisted when they came out to help me to replace the wings because and where they were anchored to the plane, because it really hit hard. It really jolted my flight. It fits tight on your head. It actually flew off of my head, and it was another lucky time.
Yeah.
So wasn't my time yet.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us about those two other incidences?
Yeah, one instance when we were on a regular close support to front lines. We were making our passes and that, and the problem you always had to be aware of what they call, I guess, target hypnosis, where you hang on the target too long and you go right into the ground. And you always had to be cautious of that. You couldn't, because you're traveling at pretty good speed and angling down and strafing, and you had to pull up before you went into the ground, which my wife's brother, he was a fighter pilot in the South Pacific, and he was doing aerial gunnery or strafing, ground strafing, targeting, and hung onto the target too long, and then when it come time to pull up, couldn't make it. He went right into the water, and so he lost his life that way. And you always have to be careful of that ground hypnosis. But anyway, in one of my cases, I had ground was not the only thing you had to be concerned about. You had to be alert every round. So as I was making the passes and grounding. And hanging on a little bit longer maybe than what I should, but there was these power lines right at me there there was no way that I could pull up without hitting them. And so I just stayed down on the ground, close to the ground, and flew under them, and then pulled up, and it was okay then, made it all right. But that one enough scared me a little bit too.
What was your first combat mission flight after that?
First combat mission? Oh, that's hard to remember. That's
Yeah.
the routine. First combat over in Europe would have been ground strafing, be similar to what would have been with the, I can't remember it now, Patton's ground Third Army. We were always, every mission we had was with Patton, giving him support as Third Army. And what we had was routine targets, which were pointed out by their ground man, which incidentally, one of our people was always called to go to the front lines, spend 2 weeks, as a relay the message, what their problem was back to the group, so we would know what to carry, whether it be napalm, bombs, or belly tank, or the whatever munitions we needed, or whatever type of bomb we needed, anti-personnel or whatever. But you'd load the plane up to coincide with what type of mission it was going to be. And so when they would call and would want help, and why, that's what we would carry to do the job. And of course, napalm, and skip bomb. We skip bombed, and skip bombing. You're flying 28 feet, 30 feet above the ground, and drop the bomb, and it hits the ground, and it bounces and skips, and goes several 20 or 30 feet in the air and into the side of the building or whatever it is that you're going for. But you have to also pull up in time you don't run into the building yourself. So napalm, you come in and you drop the napalm at a certain feet, so it hits the ground, it busts and spreads flames. I guess you've seen it in the TV, on the movies and stuff like that, where they come in and you see the fighters come in and hit, and everything is engulfed in flame, and that's just the way it is with the napalm. It hits and spreads, and it's a terrible weapon to have to do. But then we have dive bombing, where we had specifics to dive bomb, and where we'd carry bombs and fragmentation or whatever it might be, and generally did that at 6,000 feet. And you'd come in and pull in, you'd do a dive, and we have a site there. And in other words, where sometimes the target is small enough, or just a railroad track, we have to want to hit that, got to hit that railroad track with a bomb, and it's amazing you can do it on it. So
you flew cover for General Patton.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us about the letter you received and just your experience on flying cover for him?
Oh, it was Patton's Third Army, and we moved along. We had our airfield as close as we could to the front lines, and as he moved forward, why, we had to move too, because if we stayed back too far, why, we would have to put on belly tanks for extra fuel. So instead of munitions, we would be carrying fuel. So most of our, and if I understand the question, let's see, generally, well, a good example, I guess, would be a specific problem we had with the 4th Armored Division. There's a brigadier general that was commanding. The commander of the 4th Armored Division that got themselves into a spot with the Tigers tanks. They were trapped and surrounded, and they called and asked for help. And which we came in and used the I can't remember what it was, but I think combination of skip bombing and that we sent the Tiger tanks. They were afraid of the airplanes, because that was one thing that we could get to them, and so they pulled away from the 4th Armored. And the next day, this general came in and shook hands with everyone that was in that flight that pulled him out of the trouble that he was in. And he came in and shook hands of it. But we saved the 4th Armored. But there would be specific things when they call for help. We'd have another good example, I guess, is the lines were boxed, not boxed, but can't move because of specific target ahead, and then the ground and the artillery and that couldn't zero in on what they were looking at. So we'd come in and we flew over their targets and that, and we would drop dive bombs and then we would act as I forget what you call it, but anyway, we would tell them what they want, and they'd want to know if they sent artillery shells where they were hitting, if they could hit how much. And so we actually cited where it was either short or long or so forth, how you're on target. So we helped them out that way, and And I thought then doing this, why, out of the corner of my eye, I saw this something pass by, and I couldn't figure out what it was, like motion of air. Or, it was real strange. And then it dawned on me that I was right in the middle of the barrage. The bullets the artillery was shooting, and I was in it. And I got the heck out of there in a hurry. So I could have been hit by one of our own artillery shells. And but anyway, we helped them out, and that's the reason we have a ground man. Spends 2 weeks. You have to learn and to how to translate what they needed and what we had to use in order to help them out. It wasn't as simple as call for an airport supply. You don't get it instantaneously. You know ahead of time, or they begin to see what they're going to need, and we get it.
Have you received other letters as well? I think we were talking about that before we started filming, that you have other letters.
I think there's several hanging in there. I'm not sure which anymore. We'll have to look at that and see. No, I'd have to look too, see what.
I do remember you mentioning earlier today that you were on a ship when you heard that the war was over.
Did what?
That you were on a ship when you heard the war was over, or you were?
Oh, U.S. John Erickson.
Yes. Do you remember like your feelings of just like hearing the war was over? Was there anything going through your head when you first heard that?
No, the only thing I remember the war was over was when our commanding officer got us all together and told us about the bomb that was dropped, and then it was over on that.
And then another question I had for you, something that's pretty well known that I'll be putting on the camera right now, is the paper that you show us a lot, Hitler Dead. If you remember that paper, where did you get that paper?
That was Stars and Stripes. That's printed in London, and they came over and sent them over to us, and we got a regular newspaper from the Stars and Stripes. Got them, I think, on a weekly basis or something like that, and we look forward to seeing it, getting it.
Mm-hmm. And then, so now, kind of fast forwarding a little bit, the war is over. You're coming back home. What made you come to Iowa?
When we were in Marseille, France, waiting after the war ended in Europe, all our equipment, as I mentioned, was sent to Okinawa. And so we were waiting to get passage to Okinawa and to be sent there to be in the invasion of Japan. And there was a buddy of mine that talked with all the time that we were sitting on the railroad tracks there in Marseille, France, and I told him I wanted to get an education when I was. It was one thing I wanted to do was get an education and that. And he was telling me about his school that he was at. They had a good school where he lived, and they had good engineering school and that. And he was from Ames, Iowa, I guess. Oh, so it was Iowa State. So I said, well, with the war, or if we make it through this, I said, he said, I'll give you a call. I'll let you know if they're registering. And then so, and when the war did over, like I mentioned, John Erickson passed through the Straits of Gibraltar and into the Pacific Ocean, received the orders to change its course to the States instead of Okinawa. I knew the war was over, so immediately my mind started going to how am I going to get an education. And fortunately enough, had the GI Bill. And the GI Bill that the Congress passed that you'd get a year's education for a number of years. So I was in 4 years, and so I got a whole stint with That's where I met my wife, was in Ames. But let's see, I don't want to digress here where it was the question, from the question.
So you basically got an education here, found your wife. Did you just figure this would be a good place to kind of set your roots then here in Iowa?
Oh, let's see. No. Oh, well, anyway, well, I'll just finish what had happened then was registering to Iowa State there. That's going to get my education. And Glenn McCord is the boy who lived in Ames, and that we talked about in Marseille, France. And he's the one that sent me the telegram and told me that the registration was being 3 days. School starts in 3 days, and so I immediately hopped into I had a Pontiac. I bought a old Pontiac, and came to Ames and began to register for a thing. And so as we were registering, I was in line here behind, and they were asking this guy in front of me. He said, "What are you going to major in?" He says, "Chemical engineering," and that. And I had not the slightest idea what I was going to register in. All I knew is I wanted to get an education. And so they asked me, "So what are you registering for?" And I said, "Well," and I stuttered a little bit. I couldn't think of anything. I said, "It's chemical engineering." That's good. So I registered as a chemical engineer at Iowa State University, and I got my 4 years there, and that's where at Ames, and that's where I met my wife, and at a studio college, town studio in Ames. We had to get some pictures taken at this studio, and got a picture. And there she was, walked across, and I saw her, and and right down there, well, I guess I said that. I want to see one of these days. I want to meet her, see where she's at. And sure enough, I did. I met her on a blind date one night. She had a friend of mine, and he had a girlfriend, and she was going to. They wanted to. Her girlfriend was my wife. So he wanted to know if I'd come on a blind date that night. And sure enough, when I saw who she was, oh, this is the girl from the studio and that I had a date with that night. And that's where it went from then on. Why, it was just a matter of time. And nature took its course. We proposed, and we got married before I graduated, actually. See, on the GI Bill, I was getting, as single, you'd get $65 a month. And when I got married, well, I got a raise up to $105, I think it was. And so that had everything. And I got an apartment. Her father had an apartment house that that's the one on that became available. Whoever was there, he told them to move out. Then we got the apartment. But anyway, it wasn't as harsh as it sounds anyway, because she was preparing to go anyway. It was a lady that so it didn't make it. So it was, the timing on it was real good. So we had a little apartment to finish school with, and graduated there in Ames, and got a job with the General Chemical Company in East St. Louis. Was not happy with I thought it wasn't type the white work that I wanted to do. My father-in-law, then the new father-in-law, there was an ad in the Des Moines Register, apparently. DuPont was looking for engineers, and he sent to me, and so I immediately took the weekend or took a Friday off and came up and interviewed and got the job as a chemical engineer with DuPont. And that was in 1957, 53, or 53, I guess. We talked, and let's see. Yeah, I got the job there, and worked myself up in DuPont. And been ever since till I retired. I've been retired, and well, I can't remember, but when I was 60. I was age 60, so that would have put me 82, I guess, wouldn't it? So from 82, so I've been retired over 30 or almost 40 years, so I'm going to run break their pension plan. So everything worked out perfect there. But it's amazing how things work away on that. I was 99 in December 6th. I'm going on 100 years old right now.
After you got in the cadets,
you
had this. You were trying to explain to your mom what you were doing.
Yeah, this is a letter I sent my mom, the cadet. Yeah, see the guy on the right? Remember that picture of D flight down below here?
Mm-hmm.
It's from that. That's me right there. And there's my first full solo flight. Pelazari. Yep. And then this is a basic training. Metro, the Metro they called it. And we got to the point where we could begin to navigate pretty well in Metro on that. And this is me in Weinberg again. And I don't know. Oh yeah, there's Arch de Triomphe down that way. More. And we walked down the Arch de Triomphe. Eiffel Tower. I told you after the war, when the war ended, I actually flew around that.